All right, here we are. We are live over at Millstone-SRG. The SRG is for Self-Reliance Group. We are your hosts. I'm Mark, and over there,
I'm Blake.
And then down below us is, you may recognize him from our last podcast, or the first podcast we've done, but he's coming back on here again tonight. Patrick, just in case somebody didn't see you before, Patrick, you want to give a quick little, just a little bio? They can go back and watch your more detailed thing, but just remind everybody who you are and why and how we bribed you to be here tonight.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate that. Just real quick, a lot of military experience, Marine Corps, Army, better part of like 28 years now. Wrapping that up, 7.5 years at CIA, and then probably a good 8 or 9 as a local law enforcement guy who got to work on some task forces, and also had some emergency management experience, which I think we're probably going to talk about tonight.
Right on. Blake, why don't you just remind everybody a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm
besides the guy with the best of the beards.
Man, I just recently, especially since I've had my little one, my gray's coming in a lot more recently, I've noticed too. So no, anyway, I'm just a gunsmith in northern Minnesota. Have a little bit of a hobby farm, just kind of try to go back to some of the old ways of doing things with some modern technology, and trying to raise a family doing it. So.
And I'm your other host for Millstone. I'm Mark, 20 years in the military, active National Guard, Army Reserve, the whole kit and caboodle. Better part, almost 10 years in the agency, and currently small business owner for Centerline Systems. But, I think the other thing here, just to kind of, we're not saying look at us, but we're just trying to say, like, we've operated in these worlds before, and part of it, and maybe you've never done any of the quote unquote cool guy stuff like that. But if you live in a rural area, or if you live in a city, I guarantee you've got a set of experiences and skills that are very important when it comes to preparedness and self-reliance, right? So, I was just going to chime in there. I've been hunting since I was 10, and fishing, so yeah, I know people are like, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, as we're going to point out here tonight, when we talk about, so this is a course that I created back in 2014 called The First 72 Hours. But part of this, in this conversation, we're going to talk about life skills. And, I guess just a great way to start off right there before we jump into it. And I'll, get, Blake and Patrick to chime in. How many people even know our kids? How many kids do you even know who are out there mowing lawns and, running paper routes and walking, going away for disappearing for half the day with their 410 and going and fishing or shooting a grouse and all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of these normal life skills are they're becoming fleeting. There's not even a lot of adults who know some of this stuff. Blake, Patrick, you guys want to add to that as we kind of get ready to jump into it?
Sure. I mean, and that's kind of the thing. We see it in the convenience of our culture. It's everything is provided instantly or near instantly. It used to be not so long ago at a very affordable cost, although that's kind of changing right now. But because of that instant gratification, that being able to go down to the store, get whatever it is you need, there was never a desire to learn those base skills. Or even from that perspective, where some people maybe were raised with them and they didn't pass those along. So unfortunately, when you don't pass those skills along, like hunting, fishing, the outdoorsman kind of stuff, it kind of goes by the wayside. And especially when we have such a plethora of distractionary technology just right at our fingertips.
Yeah. Patrick?
Yeah, well, I'll just kind of cue off of what Blake just said in a phrase you use, normal outdoor skills. They're not normal anymore, right? So I think it's incumbent upon people that, hey, you grew up in a rural area, or you just grew up with people, who or you yourself were outdoors all the time, hunting, fishing, just, scavenging, and just comfortable in that environment. Share that with people, invite them, and maybe resharpen your own edge a little bit. I think that's vital, because you never know. We'll talk about this more, but the 72-hour concept is real, and I've seen it up close and personal with folks that have none of those skills.
And as we jump into it, so I guess I just want to say this. Yeah, Blake, your camera is glitching a little bit there. Yep, you are. Yeah, so it's the Matrix. They're already coming, right? Hey, but for everybody, if you join us live, I think maybe going forward, something I would very much like to see is, like, give a shout out, say who you are. You don't have to say your full name or anything, but hey, you know, from Ohio or whatever, you know, it's always just kind of cool and gives us a sense of who we're talking to because, you know, like, so Gene, I'm pretty sure you're watching right now. Gene, there's going to be a couple sections during our conversation where you might be able to add to the conversation simply because, and I'm not going to say, well, it says it right there in your tag, Gene from across the pond. But there's some stuff going on in your country right now that might be the conditions that would cause somebody to really start thinking about being better prepared, more self-reliant. And that just kind of flares up like that. And if you want to add to that, Gene, when we get there, you know, that's what we'd really like to see. You know, for whoever joins us, and whether you're watching it live with us now or if you watch it on demand later, add comments, right? You know, Blake and I aren't doing this to see ourselves in TV. I can barely, or, you know, I have a hard time looking at myself in the mirror half the time. That stereotypical, I'm say one more time and then we'll jump into it. You know, face for radio and a voice for silent film. So,
well, but I mean, that's the thing we're talking about doing is also building that community, both digitally and in the real world. And I mean, and the more we can interact with people, the more we can interact, especially outside of maybe our core group, the more we can get different perspective on things, the more we can exchange information. I mean, if you look at our ancestors, when we were still hunter-gatherer tribes and we were moving through the forests or the plateau regions or the tundras, wherever we may well have been, when we ran into another tribe, if it wasn't war, it was the exchanging of knowledge. It was the, I know this, you know this, let's make each other better. You go your separate ways. And then civilization slowly came out of that. I mean, so if we're really talking about it, it's taking those old methods with the new methods and moving forward. Oh.
Yeah, and then we've got so Gene from across the pond chimed in, and I'm just going to bring up. So John Doe is watching. I've noticed that veterans are very discontent with the community and have lost interest in their skill sets. And then John saying he's from Lower Alabama. You know, I think that well, here before we get into it, I see everybody kind of nodding a little bit. Why don't you guys respond to Mr. Doe, and then we'll move on right there, because there is something very interesting in what he's saying, that many veterans have become discontent with their community. Patrick, do you want to jump on that?
Yeah. You know, I know a lot of people who once they leave the military, and again, I've been the lifer for a long time because I'm coming up on 28 years. I've seen this stuff time and time again. People get out. It's almost like they'll go into self-destruct mode, meaning they let their bodies go, or anything that they did in the military that they view as forced upon them, like they'll rebel, right? It's like the teenager who leaves home and mom and dad don't know what they're talking about, this, that, and the other, but maybe they instilled some good habits and skills. I think what he's referring to, I mean, especially if we're talking about like the combat arms folks, you know, all that navigation, all your, you know, rural movements, the firearms, all the things that actually take work or valuable life skills. Maybe we don't have to be in conventional warfare or a coin environment to use that stuff, but hey, why not maintain it? I've always looked at it, you know, any skill that I've received, whether it was from agency, military, whatever, as long as it was solid and based in principle, I looked at it as a gift and like, hey, I'm going to do my best within, you know, reasonable means to maintain that. And that's just kind of the way I viewed it. But he's right. I think there are some folks that they switch that off and just go full hog into civilian mode. And next thing you know, they're like 60 pounds overweight. And yeah, I'm not going to do that. Or, you know, who knows, right? But that's something I think you can reach out to fellow veterans and talk to them about, and just kind of, you know, keep them motivated and say, hey, man, not even motivated, but just like make them realize you're not the normal bear. You were given some of these things. Why don't you just for fun, just kind of, you know, keep the edge sharp. That's all.
Yeah. And
well, you know, and just on that note, before we come over to you, Blake, real quickly, but to add on to Patrick and John, John, I'm assuming that you're a veteran, but, you know, depending when you served. So, you know, you just heard Patrick, he's talking, he's still in. I joined in 85, and I think some of the skill sets, so I was 11 Bravo when I joined, and, you know, that was still the Cold War, light infantry, light fighter type of mentality. So a lot of that field craft, that woodcraft, you know, navigation, shelters, booby traps, that was a very big part of my initial military, you know, experience, you know, and education. And then I had to come back into the military after I left the agency because my retirement was screwed up. And it was amazing to me how many men in the infantry didn't have any of these skills anymore. Like land navigation was pretty much like, a wash, because it was all FBCBs and computer and, and all this kind of crap. And, I remember and I was working my business and I just had some of my junior enlisted. I just showed them how to do some like rudimentary celestial navigation at night, some fire, shelter, that kind of stuff. And I was just amazed, here were a bunch of, private, all the way up to E4, your E4 mafia. There's actually even a couple of E5 guys as well that joined in, but none of that had been taught to them in their military career. So that's going to become very important. And so I'm not just rambling. So for me, I grew up with that as a kid, but then those skills were even, sharpened or, even, driven home even more so because my initial military experience, it was all about light infantry and, being a badass sneaking through the woods like that. So Blake, you good? You want to answer that or should we jump into it?
Well, one thing I will say real quick about the community side of things that John Doe was talking about, and that's, I see it unfortunately, and basically even my little town that I live in to an extent, is people don't view community anymore, whether it's in the military or whether it's in the civilian life, as something that's important. It's we all live in our own little individual nexus. We can reach out to the whole world through technology, so we don't need to go across the street and talk to somebody else. And because of that, we've stepped away from the concept of community, like true community, like going to the fish fry down at the firefighting hall every year and talking to your neighbors and all that kind of stuff. That stuff's gone for the most part. I mean, it still exists, but it's not embraced like it used to be, or the big picnics and that stuff. And maybe it never really fully existed, but striving to get back to actually building a community of people that matter and have those skills, I think that's extremely important. And, to the point of a lot of people not knowing labs or land nav skills or that in the military and all that, it's kind of crazy to me that, again, these are things that humans have developed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then all of a sudden, because we've developed technology over the last 30 years that's capable of removing that from our hands, we decide, okay, we'll let the computers take over and just say, yeah, screw it, we don't need to know it anymore. Well, that's kind of concerning in the long run if we start doing that with everything we've learned that's manual and letting the computers just take it over, because it's going to just make idiocracy really become the real world.
Yeah, Roger. And that point is going to come up here during the presentation as well. All right. So on that note, let's just jump into it here. Let me add this to the stage. Yeah, I think everybody. So look, so for anyone watching, again, whether you're with us live or if you're watching on demand, if you have a question, if you're with us live, stop. We're not reading the slide deck. Those are the worst. I always hated courses. This is a course that I developed back in early 2014. Matter of fact, Patrick and I were talking about this. And I'm like, Patrick, I think I sent you the slide deck. I bet you still have an email someplace for me back in 2014. But we're not reading from the slide deck. You guys, when you're watching it, you can read through the slide deck. For us, this is just kind of like, placement, holders, giving us a sense of the general conversation. We're not going to teach this whole course here tonight. That is not tonight's intention. This is between it depends on how much interaction, but this is about a 4-hour course. We're going to kind of breeze through like the first third of it, because our real intent is for tonight. If you saw in our previous videos, first video, we talked about the attempted assassination of Trump, because in our minds, that type of an event here, let me just minimize this for a second. That type of event was one of those things, those type of events, and we'll get into probabilities and consequences, but that could have changed your world. There's another timeline where this world is completely different if Trump didn't move his head and that bullet would have impacted him and if he would have been killed. So really, we started off that. Then we did a little bit more of talking about the political ramifications. Again, we're just trying to get you to think of what is going on around me. What is going around me, both in the natural world and the man-made world, that could create a situation where I need to be better prepared or I need to be self-reliant. And then so we had Triple X on last week, and we were talking about that. Now this time, we're just going to continue on with that theme and get you to really kind of start looking about what are the real events out there. And we'll make some jokes about zombie apocalypse and all that kind of stuff. And this is going to be funny. Blake and I were laughing about this. Patrick I don't think you were with us at this time. I wrote this in 2014. So you're going to see the slides we're going to talk about. And it's kind of scary how some of the things are exactly the same today and what has replaced some of the other concerns that we had back in 2013, 2014 than we do right now. So, all right, now I'll add it to the stage. So it's the first 72 hours, or another way of saying it. And again, preparing for the obvious and the not so obvious, right? But really, for me, this is all about crisis management and consequence mitigation. So what I mean by that is, does anyone out there think that they themselves right now had some way of managing the attempted assassination? Could you have, unless you're out there, that's totally outside of our realms, right? Just like an act of God. If there's suddenly a tornado, could you have prevented that? No, so there are some events that are just outside of our capability, but you can mitigate or reduce or lessen the consequences of those events. That's kind of really the main thing I really wanted to point out. And I'm sorry, I just saw a stupid comment that made me laugh. Zombies are real. They all own iPhones. Gene, you're about to, that is how the first 72, that's really funny. That'll come up here in a second. Now, on a personal note, and I know Patrick has a little bit of a personal side here too. So when I taught this class, I dedicated it to my comrades that died in the coast bombing. That's from my CIA background. And over my shoulder is one of my buddies right there who didn't make it out. And then this gentleman gave up his life for one of my comrades. I wasn't on this operation, but gave up his life trying to save one of my comrades who had gotten killed in an ambush. And obviously that's not an American right there. I mean, I don't know what that means. I apologize for saying that way, but it should be obvious that's an indigenous person, a person indigenous to another country in the world. And what I think this is important as we jump into it. And again, just look at the corollaries to today. The coast bombing, for me, that was just horrible. It just really highlighted how government entities, even the ones that you think are the top, tip of the spear, they get into groupthink, they get into ego, they don't want to acknowledge shortcomings, they want to cut corners for, and they want to promote people and do things for personal gain. There's so many things about that coast bombing that were absolutely never should have fucking happened, and yet they did. So interestingly, that's what the United States Secret Service is being grilled about right now. So kind of a corollary there. And then now, Patrick, I don't know if you want to jump into that with your quick little story or just your add-on to that. Again, all I'm trying to point out there is we got to pay homage to these people. We cannot forget, and that just like everybody's trying to whitewash and forget that someone tried to assassinate Trump, that's what government bureaucracies and bureaucrats do, right? Plain and simple. So put that into your brain housing group. If you think the government is going to be there to save you and protect you, well, you probably have never worked in the government then. Patrick?
Yeah. And so first of all, I mean, for folks that may not remember or may just not have known, but there were 7 CIA officers that died in a bombing that took place in Coast Afghanistan on Camp Chapman. And it was, without, I'll just go ahead and talk about publicly known stuff. I mean, there were a lot of skip steps because of 2 things: complacency and comfort and ease, right? And groupthink, right? Those things, groupthink fed all of those things, as opposed to let's do our due diligence. Let's really dig in. Let's put some work and effort towards this just to make sure, which is kind of what's supposed to happen. So that's what led to that. And I think that's going to be a common theme that comes up on some of the things that we talk about tonight, because it's always easy not to do something or let's explain it away. But as I always say, and I learned this during my time there, hey, nothing's ever a problem until it is. And if you haven't done any preparation or planning, at least had the discussion on what are some of the, contingencies that could happen after something, then you're way behind the power curve. So our goal here, I think, is to start the discussion and give you guys get your minds spinning on, hey, what would I do if this happened? So I think that's powerful.
And just to add to what Patrick said there, so another way of saying nothing's ever a problem until it is. So, in the world of terrorism, I'm sure you may or may not have heard, terrorists, if you're defending against terrorism, you have to be lucky every time. Terrorists only need to be lucky once. So my time in the agency, again, just like Patrick, pulling my hair out, is, well, we've done it this way 50 times and nothing's ever happened. And I'm like, and that therefore excuses these gross, total security, breaches of security, or, you're totally violating, how we conduct this type of operation, or what our our acceptable minimum standard is for conducting this, that, or the other. Like, well, yeah, we didn't do it the other times and everything was okay. I mean, and that's the kind of bullshit I think that we're seeing happen here today. Now, I'm going to bring the slide back up, but Blake, well, the last one, talking about the human side of it, right? The selfless service, right? So Mike giving his life for somebody not even from his country, right? And, Mike didn't know if the guy was alive or dead. He may have been trying to commit, or execute pickup on a dead body, but he still did it anyway. And I think that's very important because of the morality and the moral side of, also because you got to have morals if you're, well, I guess you don't have to have morals to deal with a crisis if you're going to be like a road warrior bandit type of jackass. But can you add a little bit of morality to that?
Well, I mean, it's important. You have to keep that morality. I mean, that's what distinguishes us between, I mean, right and wrong. And I mean, that's the thing is realistically, at the end of the day, it's all black and white. I mean, it really is to an extent. So if we weren't to, keep that morality, if we weren't to do what we were supposed to do, and, there weren't people willing to give their lives, and I mean, we're just no better than, I guess, the evil that's at the door. So even in a crisis situation, you have to keep that at the core. Because if you are in a crisis situation, let's say it's not the first 72 anymore, maybe it was the first 72 months and you're deep in it and it's gotten really bad. I mean, that's going to be, are you the person that's going to prey on the weak or try to actually, again, build community? And I hate to sound like a broken record, but that's the whole point. It's to try to keep that spark going and not just go back to the frickin' Stone Age.
Yep. Right on. All right, moving on. All right, so we kind of went out that. Just skipping that. Okay, so kind of going into Gene's point about zombies and zombie apocalypse. That's what everybody thinks of. Like, and we make like, well, what if it's The Walking Dead? Well, I think what we're really trying to point out here is the crisis. Now, you, the individual, and we're going to get into this a little bit more detail. You've got to figure out what it is that you're preparing for, what you need to be more self-reliant in order to overcome, so you can better, serve your family, your community, however you're looking at it. Because those crises are very different. And, sometimes it's based on, where you live, the environmental constraints, but also, like, in what do you have the time to prepare for and how much money do you have, to spend on that, right? So, but the one comment, and that came in, when I wrote this, I'd only been out of the agency for a couple of years, but I just hated that. And I'd said this in the agency a couple different times. It's like, we're going to wait until we're in the middle of a crisis to prepare for one. That's like the stupidest effing thing I've ever heard. And boys and girls, I hate to say it, but look what's going on right now. Again, I'm going to throw it out there. The Secret Service, look at all the CYA and everything that's going on. It's like a bunch of people who are saying, oh, shit, something bad just happened. We better kind of examine that and figure out what we're going to do. That's the wrong time. You should have been if you were serious, if you're serious about protecting yourself, being more self-reliant for you and your family, your community, your job, you've got to take the time to mentally start thinking about all of those different possibilities that, again, consequences, the crisis itself, how can you mitigate that? And that's what we're going to jump into. So yeah, and just look at the slide. Again, I wrote this and, Katrina was like a big event, So I'm saying here, just look. So if you think the government's going to help you out, I mean, this is why you're watching this video, hopefully, and this is why you're here listening to us, is because having gone through these things, you cannot wait for a crisis to start preparing. And if you think the government, and I would challenge anyone to just look at what's going on, and it's governments worldwide. Governments are bureaucracies. They're slow. They've got their own selfish interests, and they're not really going to take care of you. Maybe there is one out there. I think we've yet to see it as a society, as humans. But if you're relying on that, well, then there's a high probability that you're going to come out on the short end of that stick, right? I mean, again, I'm just sitting there and when I taught this, I just challenge everybody. Give me some examples. Give me an example where the government did a damn good job. I'll wait. That pregnant pause was intentional, right? So Blake and Patrick, what do you guys think? I mean, again, the final question is for everyone else. What does your intuition tell you? Am I off base here, just starting off already, or what do you guys think?
Go ahead, Pat.
Okay.
But is the government really going to help you out?
Well, okay. So I had about 4 years working in emergency management, and what I responded to quite a bit in that time frame was natural disasters, right? Floods, some hurricanes, some storms, things like that. What I saw up close and personal was a lot of local governments. And this is one thing people don't keep in mind. Everybody wants to look at the federal government. Hey, look at your own local leaders. Look at what's close to home. Those are the ones that are really going to have the most impact on your life. I saw local governments that had what we call emergency operations plans, which are by law, they're supposed to maintain and keep up to date. Some of those things, I've reviewed some of them that came from like 1972 or or the 70s and had never been looked at. They checked a box because they legally met a requirement that they had one, but nobody knew the plan. Nobody knew who was in charge of what agency that was going to respond, so on and so forth. So when we'd have these massive floods come through, the citizens expect, hey, that they're going to come and help us out. They're going to stop the flooding, and that was not the case. So my part as an emergency management guy was to come in, assess the damage, and get resources in as fast as possible. And getting in touch with the local municipalities in order to do that sometimes was quite the challenge. And you talk about this like freeze. Some of these folks were in freeze. They didn't even know what to do. And I said, hey, look, you've got one number to call. It's my number or our, we had a duty desk where I worked that was 24/7 and stuff's coming. Or if something's coming ahead of time, start asking for assets to be pre-deployed and pre-staged so that the flash to bang or the response time is a lot shorter. Terrible. I've got story upon story about that, but yeah, bottom line is if folks think that the government in any capacity is going to be waiting to come and rescue you and come to your aid, good luck. That's
Blake.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the whole disaster plans. Actually, it makes me want to go to a city council meeting.
Well, hey, everybody should be able to ask, hey, wherever you live, hey, do we have an emergency operations plan? What does it look like, and what agencies are trained on that? And if that answer is no, you might have just saved a lot of people's property damage or saved lives.
Right, exactly.
And just real good. I really like how you brought that up because, again, when you talk about a natural disaster, Katrina or, I'm going to screw up the train derailment, which no one's ever talked about to this day. Waiting on the government to come in is, we all know that's silly. But so, again, community, you've got to be looking at this at your local level. And if your local government is just as fucked up as the federal government, then you better be looking at your friends and family at that point.
Mark, let me throw something else in there too. There's NGOs out there. So I can say that hands down, very proud to have worked with these people. Obviously, Red Cross, really, really great. It's largely they draw from volunteers, community members, and Team Rubicon, a veteran organization that comes in and worldwide helps with disasters without question. And it's a veteran organization. So they run it with a military structure, and those people are outstanding. I can't say enough good things about them.
So my guest on Centerline, my live stream on Thursday, Murph, he was leaving the next day for a Team Rubicon recon. So there had been some tornadoes down there. So I can't remember what the phrase is, not watchstanders, but him and one other person got spun up. Or they got, spun up, that military term, but they got called up to go and do the recon to see if was the damage significant to rise to their level, and then B, did the local government need their assistance, or were they floundering and didn't even have a plan, and then depending on that, then Team Rubicon would make their decisions, and then they would either, kick everything into gear and then start helping that community, or they would just stand back and, and save their resources for when they were needed. So Team Rubicon, I'm glad you brought that up. When you were talking about it, I was going to throw that in there. So,
well, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Aren't those both, I guess, private and community organized organizations to an extent, or at least volunteer based? So they're people that actually care. They're not an elected or appointed official. They're somebody that actually is in it because they give a shit.
Like they're almost all volunteers.
Yeah, and so that alone says a lot, and to the point, like you said, Mark, about the possibly greatest train derailment in American history in East Palestine. What was the government's response with was it vinyl ethyl chloride, I believe, or something like that, or maybe it was PT. I can't remember what the chemical was offhand, but they just let's incinerate it and put it into the atmosphere and give how many people cancer for how long away. So even the solutions, quote unquote, that most government bodies are going to present to you are like take the worst of the bad decisions, and that's usually what you end up with. So if that's really what we're working with here, and then with, as we've covered as nauseum in these last 3 episodes too, the ineptitude of a lot of government officials and bureaucrats in general. And then you have legacy technologies that are no longer able to be maintained or kept running in the United States. Like, I don't know, our infrastructure, our road system, bridge systems down south, the vulnerability of our electrical grid. And you have all this. And what I'm afraid of is we're running into a cascading effect where it's not just the near Trump assassination. It's not just the East Palestine train derailment. It's not just the chance of war with Iran. It's all of these things culminating into a complex system reaching the end of its entropy. At least that's kind of my thoughts.
You're kind of stealing a little bit of our thunder. You jumped ahead, but cascading effects. One part of the system starts breaking down, another part breaks down, another part. And so whether it's a train derailment, a natural disaster, celestial event. So see, I'm just doing it right there. So let's get on to it. Right. So what we're kind of talking about there, what is the crisis, right? There was an influenza epidemic at the beginning, at the end of World War II. Hardly anyone knows about it and talks about it. That was a huge thing. Blake just mentioned a whole bunch of others. So, again, as we're saying, what does your intuition tell you? What do you think the government is going to be able to do? And then the follow-up that, to what Blake was just kind of saying, kind of jumping ahead a little bit. Okay, so let's say it's a natural disaster, hurricane, flood, whatever it is. And, or ice storms in areas of the country where you normally don't have ice storms. So maybe you're just not prepared for it. Again, these are real world natural things. We see them all the time. Oh, an airport got shut down for a day because they had 3 inches of snow for the first time ever, and they didn't have snow removal equipment. I mean, so whatever the event is, just take a look, take a step back, and to Blake's point, and actually kind of what we're just been saying ad nauseum, evaluate for yourself how your local and local, state, federal government responded to it. And I'm here to tell you, when you start, probably to what Patrick's point is, when you start thinking about the positive outcomes, it's Team Rubicon, it's Red Cross volunteers, it's the Cajun Navy. There's usually something else that transpires to help, prevent that from being a total shit show. So if you acknowledge, just on that, so if you acknowledge that our government really isn't all the greatest at doing it, well, what's going to happen when that government, so as you see in the slide, think about your grid, think about electricity, think about cell phones, think about how we communicate, how we do business. And again, I wrote this in 2014, and Blake, I'm going to kind of bring this up full screen because where I'm going with this, and it was awesome just kind of reviewing. What was that big, let me see, that was like the world's, let me remember. Yeah, the world's largest cyber attack last week. Yeah, that shut down like all kinds of, so man, what if that actually would have shut down power grids? What if that would have shut down all kinds of other business? And no one's talking about that.
You shut down federal government systems.
That's right. So so to Blake's point on cascading, so that for most of us really didn't quite see it, right? And maybe some people did because of their jobs, or they did it on like maybe second and third order tangentially. They saw some of the effects. It didn't have an immediate effect on everybody, like if the grid would collapse. But that is, to me, that was Blake's point, cascading events.
Well, and to the point where you actually had it in your slide, that event that took place in April 2013, that was a crazy attack, and not a lot of people know about it. And it was one the government kind of wanted to like push under the rug because it shows how freaking vulnerable our electrical grid was, from a few people making some pot shots, taking out, 15 or 16 transformers. And and the thing is I think they kind of hid that. I think there was actually a decent shooter there too, but it was incredible what damage they could do in a very limited amount of time to our infrastructure.
Well, and so you see, that's where I was going to kind of go. So even in kind of what we were talking about earlier, Patrick and I, government's inability to actually even look itself in the mirror and make corrections, or to even admit its mistakes. Mm-hmm. So that this event was a huge event, but this actually even happened again 2 years ago out in California. There was another spate of people attacking these remote power stations. But this was a huge event back there, so much so that, some people went out and actually did the research and looked at it and discussed it, and it just got totally ignored. And then, just a few years ago, we had some, and whether they were probes, like in other words, like, let me just go and see and try to see if I can sneak in here and see what
vulnerabilities.
happens. You know, it's test exactly. It's looking for your vulnerabilities exactly, right?
Pen testing. Yeah.
But but just back on that though. So had that been successful, or if anything even like that happens, whether it's intentional or unintentional, the consequences of that event are going to be dramatic. Would you guys agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, 100%. On that note, with confusion, chaos, and all that, one of the things that's really pushed out there in the emergency response community is letting the public know what's going on, because in addition to the first 72 hours, people will generally be okay, and will start like asking for help and communicating with each other. But when they can't, like cell towers go down and things like that, then it's up to the local and state governments to let people know what's going on, because that's where the chaos really ensues, is when people don't have information. So I think in this part of like the Midwest, I think they call it the PAWS system, the public area or public alerts and warning systems. So that's generally what you get your Amber Alerts sometimes on your phone, or hey, there's a tornado watching, your phone starts going beep, 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 right? That type of stuff. But that can be used for significant events too. It's just a matter of whether or not it's done. Because we've had, where I live, at least a couple different tornado warnings where things have been around us. And the phone hasn't gone off, which makes me question, why isn't somebody starting a pause alert on this,
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're counting on the government to inform us. So,
and again, to the point too, is we used to have pretty decent analog warning systems that just screamed to the skies when there was a tornado coming. That doesn't seem to get used quite as much.
Well, Blake, I did hear that. I had it a week or two ago. I did hear that, but I didn't get a pause alert saying, hey, here's exactly what's happening.
Oh, go ahead.
But no, just real quickly, what you both are saying, it to me, it highlights. So we're putting all of our eggs in a basket, and that basket, we haven't even proven if that basket can hold the weight of the eggs, or if there's, or is the weave tight enough so eggs don't fall out between the weave. Some of that old stuff, just like old vehicles, old radios, et cetera, et cetera. So to your guys' point, because just to add to that, and totally off script, what about the guy in Hawaii who used their system and said that there were incoming nuclear weapons?
Oh my God!
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my next thing. Yeah, that's where things can go seriously wrong.
Dude, there were whole lives ruined because of that. There was if I remember correctly, I think there was a brother that got his sister pregnant because of it. It was terrible, the fallout that happened.
The world's going to come to an end. Come here.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's maybe next time you leave that kind of commentary out. That was just gross, man.
It's crazy. I mean, think of the destruction that just one false thing goes out. You have someone that gets control of that system, just like we were talking about with the electrical grid. I mean, it's cascade. We are too complex of a system. You remove one single variable and it can go crazy real quick. Or people are primed to think it will go crazy real quick too.
So we might be preaching to the choir here. Again, we're 38 minutes into it, and we're talking about a lot of things that if you watch this video, you probably already know of, or you're already thinking of yourself. But take a step back and ask yourselves, what about all your other friends, your family, your co-workers? Are they even thinking about this? Because that's just as important. If no one else is paying attention, and then like we're getting at, and then some government employee, who shouldn't have been in that position to begin with, hits the little, phone alert saying there's nuclear weapons, what are the people around you going to do? As Blake's, point. I mean,
the most extreme side of that.
Yeah. All right. So moving on. So, again, chaos, right? But, I mean, shit happens. So I know there's some people out there who might be like, well, okay, this is all exaggeration. I'm going to probably skip over the most obvious stuff, which is like, how many times do we hear about somebody who goes out hunting, hiking, gets lost in the woods, their car goes off the road, and they spend a week out there? I mean, this happens all the time. So preparedness and self-reliance, it's your day-to-day grind. It's some things that you can't control. But this stuff does happen. So if your friends and family, well, here, I guess I would say it this way: unless you're just starting to think about these subjects and starting to take action on your own to do something about it, maybe then you might have some friends and family saying, oh, you're just, you're one of those, you're turning into one of those kooks. But if you were like the rest of us, like I never kind of really went away from this, but maybe I became more of my life after I left the agency. But I remember the people, who I first came into contact with when I first came back to where I lived, I grew up, and their comments then to where their comments are now. And suddenly it's like, yeah, it's not so funny anymore. You got a lot of people starting to wake up that, are realizing that, no, this shit does happen. The government probably isn't going to help me. And then just kind of maybe segueing into the next thing. And man, and this is now my personal opinion here, but I don't believe man is born with morals. I think man is born with the desire to survive, a survival instinct. But I think morality is what we learn by our interactions with the human beings we've been surrounded with. And my case in point would be, your morals and your moral compasses could be very different from an inner city gang member. But to that person, they've got their own set of morals. Like, you don't betray the group, you listen to the leader, you give 10% to the big guy, whatever it is, right? So morals, can vary from individual to individual. So just consider that. That's all I'm trying to get at there. Do you guys want to add anything to that as we're kind of going on the chaos and what really people should start thinking and what they could expect?
Yep. So it's interesting to me that also that this was so long ago, because 2014 doesn't seem that long ago to me. But we had this little thing called COVID that made all this stuff come to light in a big way. And to your point,
look on the slide. There it is. What happens, to our technologically dependent society and then here's a list of things: a natural disaster, solar flare, EMP. What's the next one? An infectious disease, or a cyber attack or act of terrorism.
Exactly. And think about what happened in I wouldn't just limit it to major urban areas. I'd probably say nationwide. People were freaking out. They started going to Walmart and the grocery store, buying every roll of toilet paper and hand sanitizer they possibly can. Well, I'm going to get me and my family and screw everybody else. That's a statement in selfishness right there. Well,
it's also a statement of you aren't prepared. Why did you wait until a crisis to start realizing you don't have a big? And why were you only buying toilet paper in the little 4-pack rolls? I mean, I guess you just love going to the grocery store all the time. But that's also a testament of who we are as a people. Oh, I don't have to worry about it. Then all of a sudden, a crisis hits you like that, and then now you're scrambling to get toilet paper and milk, or whatever things
Yeah, and then just look at how the government agencies, responded to that too. From state all the way on down. I mean, shutting small businesses down. Locking people in, keeping people from going to church. But strangely enough, you could go to Walmart and Home Depot. That's kind of odd.
Well, and I think that was kind of one of the whole points of that, let's say, exercise, if you will, is how far can they push? How hard can they push? How much can they control? And how much on top of that will the population go along with it and allow for it to happen?
Bingo.
Push a little harder, back off. Wait a little while, push a little harder again, back off. It's the boiling of the frog, man.
Yeah. Hey, just a little quick shout out here. We've got Clint, who was on the first episode. He just actually chimed in, so Clint must be watching. So, Clint, great to see you here. Hey, add any comments or anything you want there, Clint. We're kind of 43 minutes. We're only going to probably take this for an hour. So we're not really teaching the class. We're just trying to have a general conversation to kind of get people to start thinking and open their minds and being aware of it. And then we'll follow up on this later. But Clint, great to see you here. And if anyone didn't see the first podcast for Millstone, go back and watch it. Clint, former SF guy, Nemesis Camo, great individual. So, okay, guys, moving on here. So, do any of these other more large scale disasters you guys want to just briefly talk on or touch on, what you think, like what a coronal mass ejection or an EMP? So again, look at, the time when I wrote this. I wrote this in 2014. Look at last summer when we had balloons flying over our airspace unfettered. Here, I'm just going to come back to all this then, because I totally didn't even think about that. There was a lot of speculation. I mean, it's been brushed under the rug, and to what Patrick and I were talking about here at the very beginning. Are there any lessons learned? Are there new protocols that have been implemented so this doesn't happen again? Because it happened multiple times. And was that reconnaissance? Look, I mean, an EMP exploded in atmosphere. A nuclear device exploded in atmosphere is going to cause that electromagnetic pulse. It's going to be horizon, based. but the damage that would do, right? And so again, there's other people who've written great papers on this and who've gone widely ignored as well. I just wanted to throw that up there because I just saw that, and that was another example. I was talking about it back then, and then we've just had something that could have been a dry run, or had China been so inclined, they could have actually maybe pulled that off. And then where would we be right now? You would have woken up. It would have been an inflection point. Boom. And just like that, your whole world would have changed. And then good luck getting toilet paper at that time.
Yeah. So I'll throw this in too. So we used to categorize things into like natural and man-made disasters. And a man-made disaster could be, an active shooter. It could be a full-on terrorist attack, that type of thing. And here's an example. I won't mention the town, but I was in a emergency management and SWAT capacity at this time. There was a shooting that took place in a mall. And what happened? There was a gang member that was sitting with a girl. I guess a rival gang member saw this person with a girl, knew the girl, figured, hey, I'm not going to stand for this. Went out to his car, got a gun, got somebody to wait for him, shot the guy, and then took off. Well, it get reported in the mall. Now, keep in mind, all the store owners and all the people in the patrons in the mall, they don't know any better, so they start calling 911, and it goes out not as a shooting, but an active shooter. So this is a massive difference. So now all of a sudden, here comes 4 SWAT teams tripping all over each other, command and control getting into the mix. They finally, the local PD identified the guy that was the shooter, stopped him on a traffic stop, arrested him, and then they determined, hey, there's no more threat. They're giving a press conference saying, hey, look, it's all over, but the word didn't reach the SWAT teams that are clearing the mall. So now people are re-entering the mall. Now, if you've got a kid there, you're going to, bust your butt to get to the mall. I want to make sure my kid's okay. So there was traffic nightmares. Cell phone towers were jammed up. It was just a comedy of errors. And so SWAT team was rolling around trying to clear them all. Hey, why do these people keep coming in? Why are people running up to us asking questions? That's not a good thing for what you think is an active shooter. So the potential for, just, I don't know, I guess you would call it fratricide, because it was very high there. So, but the words mean things, and that's where that, chaotic events managed the right way with experienced personnel. That's why people in leadership positions in government, whether it's a mayor, fire chief, police chief, the spokesperson for whoever that city or town is, that stuff's important. They need to practice that stuff, because when it happens, the urge to just throw something out there without being accurate is very high. Just like you watch any event on throughout the world, the first reports usually come in are very inaccurate, and things have to change over time. More information has to come in before the full picture is developed. Mm-hmm. So that chaos, that causes massive chaos with folks. So also understanding, hey, I'll listen to what's being put out, but I also need to 100% know. Getting some ground truth is everything. And in that case, I mean, if that was my kid in the mall, I probably would have showed up too and seen what was going on. Mm-hmm. That would have been very traumatic.
And as we just move on, not to try to spend telling personal stories, but to Patrick's point, Blake brought this up earlier, and then this goes back to the very beginning. So my very last, time in uniform, I was a company commander out of a National Guard unit, and it's the National Guard. One of the main functions of the National Guard is to respond to emergencies. So like Patrick, I went and took a whole bunch of our online leadership courses having to do with emergency management. And I introduced myself as the company commander, because our armories in their town. I met the sheriff, I met the chief of police, I met the mayor. I started, working with their emergency management. So we could have at least, and we were establishing lines of communication, because in the middle of a crisis, that's all I'm trying to get at. It ain't looking at me. Use that as an example. You can't wait until you're in the middle of the crisis, as Patrick's pointing out, to be trying to figure this stuff out. You already have to have established those lines of communications. And more importantly, you should probably have already done some rehearsals, even if it's just a tabletop exercise. Yeah, something's better than nothing. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling shit out of your fourth point of contact. And if you don't know what that is, that's your butt, right? That's the fourth point that hits the ground when you jump. All right, going back on. Blake, you got anything you want to add to that?
No, other than it's interesting to me. Again, it goes into the cascade effects on this little blip, like Patrick was talking about. It's, one event takes place, thought it was something bigger than it was. then the ripple effect that goes from there, traffic jams. I mean, how many accidents probably happened because a dad was trying to get there too quickly and freaked out? You know, was someone sent to the hospital? Was the cell phone lines clogged up because of that? So somebody that was having a stroke didn't get the call in time to 911. So I mean, the ripple effects that can take place because of just a simple little mistake. So then compound that on the national or global scale, and hold on to your britches, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, and then so this kind of comes into Gene had made that comment earlier, about zombies, and then so look, and I'll, in all fairness here, when I was coming up with this class, it was my uncle who gave me the idea of zombies, Gene, and again, you think back, this is 2014. Cell phones, like it's there, but that's still the wild west of the internet, the good old days. It wasn't, the cell phones like this stuff today, that could take NASA just wished they had one of these in the 60s, but it wasn't quite the same thing, even though it was only a decade ago. But he was dead on. He's like, no, the real zombies, like, again, Rick Grimes, the movies, Walking Dead, that's all fun, and I do like zombie movies. The real zombies are all those people around you who haven't prepared, who aren't self-reliant, both physically, mentally, community. They don't have that network. They haven't even thought it through. That's the real zombie, right? And, honestly, and maybe that's even just a great point right there is, I'm not saying we end it right now, Blake, but think about it, boys and girls. Those people around you in your community, and you're like, well, I live in the country. Okay, well, what if this crisis goes beyond 72 hours? You don't think there's going to be displaced people, or whether you want to call them refugees or displaced persons, whatever. It's 72 hours and no one's had cell phones, no one's had internet, no one's had electricity. The vast majority of people, and to include some of your politicians. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind where I live, there's a high probability that I would see local leaders and state leaders basically saying, hey, if you've got this stuff, we're going to take it from you so we can equally distribute it amongst everybody. I'm like, well, no, it's my stuff. And I've spent the money and I was prepared and I'm self-reliant. No, but other people aren't. And so for the sake of everybody, we're going to take your stuff and we'll be in charge of managing it. Just think about it. I'm not saying it would happen. I've got to actually, I wouldn't take a bet with somebody who, because for my local community, if something like that happened, in Minnesota, I wouldn't be surprised at all if our governor, if our mayor did something crazy like that. I could see it. So it's not real zombies. I don't believe that. Well, there's a biblical side of that, but maybe there are Martians, or whatever. But the zombies really are all those people around us who don't think this way, haven't thought about it. Well, and Blake, I'm going to turn it over to you, or who actually have thought about it. Mm-hmm. Well, there, and Clint's kind of saying it, and I'll just go right here. Remember what I kind of told you about? I don't want to call dime somebody out specifically, but I heard somebody giving a presentation like this, and part of his whole thing is what Clint is saying here. Zombie is a euphemism for a taker. This guy's thing was he was if he needed to, he was going to take other people's shit. And I almost lost my mind right there. And that was it for me. I was done. This thing's a joke. But
and what's worse than that, he was doing more than that. He was advocating for other people to take people's stuff in a crisis situation. Basically, you prepare yourself in a combative method, and then you go and get what you need from others once that situation. I mean, he's making raiders is what he was doing.
Well, and he was basically, coming right up and just saying that, hey, look, I've got to protect my family. And if I have to take, some of your food or whatever, I'm going to do it. And it's just, absolutely horrible. So, but
that is not civilization.
Nope, that is not, and then I guess just going to that, so, and I wanted to shout out and interrupt his whole speech. I'm like, okay, that's great. So what happens when your kid is injured during that event? You just put your kid into that violent situation. Now your kid's injured. There are no doctors. There's limited medical supplies. I mean, like, have you really even thought this through, or are you just that much of an asshole? And I think,
or you got yourself killed, and now your kid's got to, fend on his own.
Well, your kid's going to die because your kid's 8 and won't make it. So, Patrick.
That's pretty pathetic. Why not just bear your character for everybody to see for worst case scenarios? We all know that we thank him for that, right? So, And the one thing that you brought up before, and I think this is actually a good thing that folks can do, and I took part in several of these things, and I think they're very valuable. The whole FEMA training manual for emergency response, right? So you mentioned a tabletop exercise. Hey, what's wrong with identifying people in your local community, those that you choose? I mean, by choice, to sit down at a table with coffee or an adult beverage or whatever, and have conversations and have it guided with, okay, hey, let's say we have a tornado comes through here. Boom. Let's say that, hey, there's all of a sudden we've got this influx of Venezuelan paramilitary gang members that have taken it, coming into town. They're starting to commit home invasions because they're being encouraged to do so. Pick your man-made or natural disaster, discuss as a group, develop your own emergency operation plan. Then once you get to a certain point, you could actually practice physically, how would that work? And then, ultimately, and this is something municipalities rarely ever get to, is a full scale exercise, because it's resource intensive. You have to actually pay people overtime, have other people covering shifts as firefighters and police officers so that they can respond to whatever the simulated training stress is, right? And go from there, because it's one thing to sit at a table and say, I'd have my guys here over in this part. They're bringing resources from here, here, and here, and they'd be there within 20 minutes. Okay, ideally. But then what we started to see when you start to move to the I forget the intermediate phase before the full scale, you start to see that's not really possible. So let's get more realistic into how fast a response can be or where it is. If communities, and think about this, we're talking about like government organizations. I feel very comfortable with the three of us, and add like 10 people that are listening in on here, that we could do this very effectively, if not more effectively than a government organization, because we've got skin in the game and we care.
Well, I think that kind of just speaks for itself, right? I mean, yeah, because you have skin in the game and you care. I mean, it's just, if you look at how wealth is distributed, kind of a little bit of there's 4 ways. If you kind of look at some great economists, but and I don't think it was Sewell said this. I think it was Friedman. But what is, if you look at the government, it's not their money and it's not being spent on them, so they don't care how that money is used, right? So that's like one of the worst ways that money can ever be distributed, is when the government's in charge of it. And that kind of would go into every other facet of what you were just kind of saying there, Patrick. Yeah. Hey, so we're at 50, just call it 58 minutes. And Blake, I know you've got a bounce. So, there's still a bunch. Again, I don't know if we want to kind of just go over some scenarios, maybe take it up to there. I mean, we could just kind of go through this, a little bit quickly, because I don't want to end it where we just did right here. I mean, we might want to just, get everybody to think about this and then wrap it up. What do you guys want to do here? Or we could end it here and then we could just pick this up next time.
I mean, it's not necessarily a bad place to go. We did kind of come to a natural conclusion here that, as we all know, for anyone who has eyes to see, the government is not going to protect your butt in any serious circumstances that come down. And again, it comes back like Patrick was just saying. It's that community organization, local level, because they have skin in the game, who at the end of the day are going to bail you out, or not necessarily bail you out, because you're that person. You got to bail yourself out, I should say. And as Patrick said, and that's kind of like, I don't know if he just kind of did that perfectly, but as we're getting into the next section, you cannot, not a single one of us, unless we were there and we were in charge of the United States Secret Service, we have no effect. We have no control over the chaos that could have come about out of whatever that event was, whether it was the failed assassination or the attempted assassination, or or a nuclear war. Unless you're not going to be able to manage that chaos, so don't even try. So find ways to mitigate the consequences. And then, as Patrick was just saying, that was just a great example of one of those things, right? Hey, I'm going to work with my fellow, my relatives, or the people I know, the people in my community, and I'm going to start talking about this stuff. Well, and I don't know if that
Mark, also a lot of that.
I just wanted to add to the very end, though. So at the very bottom part of that slide, another thing I just like, kind of going into what you just said. Part of the reasons you want to do what you just said, Patrick, at your local levels, because you can't plan for everything. You don't have the resources to mitigate everything. So you got to act accordingly. You've got to find those other people, reach out to them, start doing business with them. And then you can, as you pointed out, you're not even at field training exercise. You're not at a full sprint. You're just, you're trying to figure things out. And then you realize, like, oh, Blake's got a front end loader. Oh, and I've got chainsaws, and Patrick's got a wood chipper. Boom, 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 boom. And then now you can start, if that may be a bad example, but that I think that goes.
No, it's a good example.
Patrick. Yeah.
No, it's a great example. And I was going to just add a lot of the framework for all this stuff is available online from FEMA and other, state organizations, state emergency management groups. They put it out there. They want people to be prepared because they realize, like, hey, they can't cover everybody. So they want you to have that. So if your local municipality, township, whatever, type of government you live in, they don't have that, or they haven't exercised it, do it yourself. That way your chances of survival and awareness are much higher than the most immediate folks that would be coming to help you. So you don't need, don't be reliant. I mean, here we go. Self-reliant group. That's the name of Millstone, right? So just research those things. I'll try to find some of those things and put them in the next, or maybe even this one. I don't know if we can edit it in, but I'll try to find some of the resources that anybody could draw from.
Yeah, we can put them in the video. So
yeah, and if you push that out to me, I can either link it to this, or because I think what we'll do, Blake, just calling an audible, depending on what the schedules are like this week, and and we can all talk offline real quickly, but maybe we just do a quick follow up, another 30, because there's enough. We weren't going to do the whole class anyway, but we could easily do another 30 to 60 minute video on the last half of what we're going to do, because we really, in an hour, we only got about halfway through. Mm-hmm. So we can, if you guys want, we could talk offline and then just see about maybe doing another one this later this week, or this maybe just becomes, we finish this off next week.
Can be an ongoing thing. We'll talk about it. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, so we're at an hour, and I know you've got a ton of stuff to do, Blake. And Patrick, hats off to you as always for joining us.
I appreciate
Blake,
it.
You want to take us out here then, my good man? Am I making a command decision? Are we calling it good here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and call it, because as everybody knows, we're all very, very busy in this day and age, especially trying to keep this hustle going. So with that, I'd say I really appreciate everybody that was here tonight to listen to us. Patrick, thank you for coming. And we're going to continue this next time, where we're going to try to go with actually the classroom portion of things and what services we can start to provide. So maybe you have those resources to draw on, just as like we were talking about with some of the government services. So anyway, from that point on, I guess I don't really have anything else, Mark.
Well, Gene is saying, hey, he wouldn't mind if we've carried this on next Sunday and did the next episode. All right. Well, Gene, stand by. Anyone else watching? Hey, and again, thanks to whoever was watching tonight. Thanks for coming on, leaving a comment. If you're watching this on demand, leave a comment. Even if you want to, like, hey, I really would like to see an episode about this. Right? Mm-hmm. We're starting. As Blake just said, we're starting. We're kind of still, everybody's busy. Got a million balls in the air. We're all juggling a whole bunch of different balls. But we believe in this. We want to start sharing this information, but we want this to be your podcast as well. So let us know what you would like to see. But I think, the three of us will talk offline. I think we'll probably just shoot for the continuation of this next week on next Sunday. That's all I got. Patrick, do you got anything you want to add here?
No, thanks again. Just, hey, be aware and make sure you keep good lines of communication. And as I'll bring it back from the old podcast. If you love America, I love you. So God bless.
Amen.
Right on. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on this Sunday, the 4th of August. Again, just take a look at the world around you. We didn't even get a chance to touch on all these other events that are taking place right here, right now. Look what's going on in Israel, Iran. Iran. Look what just happened. Again, the attempted assassination. The world's largest cyber attack, Russia, China, saber rattling, what's going on in Ukraine, the civil unrest in the UK. So, that's taking place right now. Mainstream media is not covering that. But, if that was happening in your neighborhood, going back into self-reliance, and you didn't want to have any part of it. And again, I'm not taking a political side, but if there's violence, if there's rioting and things are being burnt and people are being assaulted, are you even leaving your house? So you might have to think about bugging in during that period of time. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen. And when it does, it happens just like that. So you better be prepared. Blake, take us out with some nice little good outro. Make something up on the fly, sir.
Make something up on the fly. Well, I would say that may the wind always be at your back. May your garden grow dense and your animals be fat. Oh.
That's pretty damn good. All right, everybody. Well, then stay tuned. We'll do some better job on social media this week, and we'll see you guys again next Sunday. All right, everyone. Be good. Woo!